And we're back.
Part two of our two-parter as we normally do for these positions of this time the shooting guards. Last time we had a longer list. We went 25 to 11 instead of 25 to 16. We're back today doing just the 1 to 10. It's actually the same day. It's why we're in the same outfits, big stuff. But unimportant. Important thing is subscribing. Subscribe, like, comment, do whatever you can. Just
It's
help us.
Christmas. Just subscribe.
Yeah, just help us out. Just do what you can. But we're gonna get right
Yeah.
into it. We're gonna go top 10. Who do we have at number 10?
Here at number 10, we have over in Cleveland. I didn't know he had that good of a year last year just because Cleveland was a bit of an afterthought. They seem to somehow get all these big men, Drummond and Thompson, Love last year, Nance Jr., but their guards are pretty good. So here at number 10, Colin Sexton. He actually had over 20 points per game last year.
Yeah, not only had 20 points per game last year, but post All-Star break, he had 25 points per game.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I believe he was fourth or fifth among shooting guards in points per game after the All-Star break, behind only guys like Bradley Beal, James Harden, etc. So puts him in pretty good company where if he could put up 25 per game, which is obviously what they're hoping, they drafted him very high in college. He was just a pure scorer as he was. Then yeah, Colin Sexton's probably going to keep moving up. But yeah, other than his scoring ability, his other areas of the game really need a lot of work as well. With that being said.
And that's why I'm surprised we have him that high. I'm very surprised that he made our top 10. I think that the players just under him are very close to the same level scorer. I think the likely reason he made the top 10, though, is the potential and the fact that on that Cleveland team, it's really him. As
Yeah,
much as there is Jordan and Love, they don't build the offense around the big men. Big men are there, they're dominating big men. They can probably win games on their own, and they'd rather have Sexton and Garland just run around and shoot the ball. And that worked for Sexton, though. He had a great year last year, and he'll likely put the same year up again. So I think he'll actually keep improving. I don't know if he stays in the top 10 because it's hard to be in the top 10, and he's a very fringe player. I think everyone ahead of him has a bit more of the defensive aptitudes that he's missing at this moment in his career. Luckily, they picked up Drummond though, so that'll help make up for those mistakes and should help Cleveland win a few more games. But I think that Sexton, if he does pick up that defense, he can definitely go a little higher.
yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's a guy who he is so high, like you said, because of the potential. But not only that, the fact that I think he's already showing that he's pretty much ready to reach it. A lot of guys come in, they obviously take a few years to fully get there. He already had a pretty much 5 point improvement year over the year. And like I said, from the first half of the year to the second half, he had another 5 point improvement. If this is a guy who, even with his defensive liabilities, puts up, let's say, 25 points per game over the whole year next year, we're definitely going to be talking about him as a consistent top 10 shooting guard. Obviously, they did bring in Garland. They like him a lot more at the point guard role, it seems, which is fine for Sexton. He's not that great of a ball handler to begin with.
Neither one of them are really all-star playmakers.
Yeah, no, definitely not. And again, going back to the defense, though, it's really it is a huge issue for him. I mean, if you look at the offensive real plus minus, he was actually in the positive. I believe he was +2, but his defensive real plus minus was so bad that it actually made his overall plus minus just one of the worst among shooting guards that we have. So that's
No,
something that
that's
he
that's why I'm surprised we had him this high.
yeah, definitely. But it's things too. Like he was top 10 in usage rate among shooting guards. He was top 10, 20 in value added among shooting guards. Top 20, I believe, in true shooting percentage. So yeah, it's really just the fact that you know what Colin Sexton can do offensively. You know he could score at the best of them clearly. You know he's going to keep developing. You just have to hope that other areas of his game come with it. Otherwise, we're going to see a guy obviously won't have, I think, the full potential of a guy like James Harden. But in terms of getting a lot of critique for, yes, he does score a lot, but people seem to focus more on the things that are wrong with him. That could definitely happen to Colin Sexton as well.
To me, I feel like Sexton. I don't know if he can ever top out at the Harden level. I know that's not what you were saying there, um, but I do see him kind of getting to that Zach Levine level,
Oh, absolutely. He had half
and
a year
that's
that
not
was
far
already
away.
at that level. So, I mean,
Half the year, like you said, and that's the half that they had on Andre Drummond. So maybe in a full year with Drummond and Love clicking, that pick and roll is really nice. Maybe he actually gets his assists up a little bit. Things can be looking a little better.
Absolutely. But with that being said, too, other than the guy you mentioned, who is also very offensively minded, it's going to be hard for him to move above certain guys on this list.
It's
I
gonna
don't
be hard for him to get any higher.
Yeah, like I don't know if you have anything else to say about Sexton, but I think that's kind of a good way to go into I think the next guy. I could be wrong, but I feel like the next guy is just so
Is
much
on another level. Yeah, you
better.
don't even know who's on the list.
I just feel
Uh,
like it is. I just feel like on both ends, if it's the guy I'm thinking, it's just such a better player than Colin Sexton is.
okay. It's not the player you're thinking. So it's Russell.
Okay, yeah, so that was someone different than I was thinking for
That
sure.
was definitely different than you were thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
Angelo Russell.
Yeah, D'Angelo Russell, I think I probably had him higher on my list, I believe. That's probably why I thought um, it was someone
Yeah.
different at this position. Not that I think who's likely above him is a bad choice for it either. Russell just again is one of the best offensively minded shooting guards. He's not the worst on the defensive end. He obviously has gotten better over time, but he's really just come into his own. I'd say the last couple of years in terms of being able to find ways to put the ball in the net, also get his teammates involved as well. So I've been pretty impressed with D'Angelo Russell over the last couple of years, especially because of how bad his first couple of years in the league were as well.
Yeah, and for me, what puts him apart, like you said, when he first started, when he was with LA, he was part of a lot of controversy there. They were really underperforming. You look back at those guys now, and if they would have kept those guys together, we're talking like OKC 2012 kind of level. They had that kind of potential. If you really look back and think about it, between Ingram, Ball is still a very good player. Um, Kuzma, I know he gets a lot of grief. He didn't play very good last year, but if you don't put him on a team with three players that are better than him at his position, then he still does pretty good.
Josh Hart.
And Josh Hart, yeah, they had a pretty good squad. They got limited because they overpaid for Luol Deng, which limited their salary cap, which limited them being able to bring in a productive veteran to help them actually win games. But that's enough about that foursome, what team that could have been. All I know is that whenever we're talking about Russell, he's number 9 in our list. Number 10, we had Sexton, of course. So Russell is just on another level with Sexton. He is whatever Sexton is good at, Russell is better at it, and that's even on defense. Like Russell's not a great defensive player. He's probably one of the in the top 10. He's not. He's closer to the bottom of that list than he is to the middle. That's for sure. So he's not really an all-star on defense, but he's passable. He's gotten better over a couple of years. That's what I think Sexton can get to eventually, but he's not there yet. And when you're looking at shooting, Russell's a proven 22 point per game scorer. And like him and Karl Anthony Towns are going to do really, really well together next year, and it's really going to turn into Russell's team there. I see him already better than Sexton in that category as well. And then when we're talking about playmaking, Russell has finally come into his own. And as much as we're talking that Ricky Rubio is going to be the point guard of that team, Russell is going to split the minutes with Rubio. He's going to lead the floor whenever Rubio is not on the floor. And to be honest, Russell playing with a veteran like Rubio, who's a worthy candidate of 7 to 9 assists per game any given night, it's gonna be actually improve Russell's playmaking and IQ. You get better whenever you play with better players, and that's something that I think that he's really gonna rub off on Russell, and he'll actually become a better player in that category as well. So I think that this is a good spot for him. He can even go a couple spots higher. He could even get, I don't know if he reaches the top 5 considering that level that we have at the top 5, but he can definitely be at number 6 or 7 for the rest of his career, potentially even in the top 5. But he's definitely on just another echelon than a player like Sexton at this moment.
Yeah, and that's kind of a couple of things there. Like you said, for Colin Sexton to move up, it is going to take a lot, not only because of how good D'Angelo Russell is, but also because he is very young as well. It's not like it's in a situation where Russell is going to be on the decline in a year or two. Sexton has a huge ability to move up. D'Angelo Russell is only a couple years older in reality. He was a first overall pick, or I believe it was a first overall pick within the last 5 years. So it's a guy who hasn't been in the league that long, and clearly he's already found himself to be pretty established. And like you said about Minnesota, obviously with Rubio, but also the fact that he gets to play alongside Karl Anthony Towns.
Good friend.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a situation that he could find himself in and really thrive. Hopefully, he's going to enjoy playing there. In terms of his splits last month or last year, he really only had 2 bad months, and ironically, it was the 2 bad months where there wasn't as many games. October and March were his two worst months. Everything in between, he had about 22, 23 points per game.
Not the kind of player he is.
Yeah, he even had 29 points per game in November, I believe it was, which was a pretty busy month for them. So the fact that he's able to do that at some aspect, he's able to month over month put up 22, 23, and 6 a game. Yeah, I mean, D'Angelo Russell at the 9 spot, I think I had him a couple spots higher, but he's very deserving of a top 10 regardless.
So he was not the number 1 overall pick, but it was 5 years ago. It was in the 2015 draft. He was the number 2 overall pick
Number two.
behind good friend Karl Anthony Towns.
There you go.
Imagine that.
Yeah, so there you go.
Imagine that.
And look at that. That's something that I feel like a lot of people, they say they're friends, but they forget that Minnesota now has the number 1 overall and number 2 overall pick from the 2015 NBA
A
draft.
very successful draft as well. Devin Booker was in that draft as well, which is why some of the rumors had of all 3 of those players teaming up because they were our friends for a long time. But I think that's what's going to set Russell and Towns apart next year, is that they do have a certain chemistry that takes a long time to build. And I think that they've already established that. In the first year, it took a little while. Russell got there a little late throughout the season, but now that they've had a full season off, I think they'll make some noise this year.
Yeah, definitely. And with Russell too, ironically, he actually did have a couple listings at forward, or sorry, not a couple. He had one game that he started small forward, and he actually did really well. He had 24 points per game, 24 points in that game, 5 assists, 6 rebounds. Obviously, this is not something you want consistently, but the fact that he's shown somewhat of an ability to play 3 different positions, that again is a very good player in its own right.
I don't know if he ever slots in at small forward. I think that's an emergency case scenario. I don't think they're going to need that this year, considering
Still
all the players.
doable, though.
It's like doable, like it is for Kyle Lowry. Doable.
Yeah, but either way, again, it just shows how versatile offensively.
No, he's a great player offensively, and he's definitely improving defensively every year. And it's funny that we had him at number 9 because at number 8 we had a player that you probably thought was number 9. You definitely thought I would not have valued this player as highly as I did. I don't know why. I think you think that I value vets a little bit more, but this guy's a young buck. You know, we have OKC's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander.
Yeah, I mean, you might. It's not the fact that he's young that you valued him so much, as the fact he's Canadian, right?
That's not the only reason. Come on now.
No, of course not. No, but in reality, he's obviously
what a great list for Canadians. Wow, what a good day.
Yeah, and even then, like I said before we got into Russell, just a great player already on both ends of the court, both offensively and defensively. Even if it's aside from just things like rebounding, Shea is obviously a good player on the defensive end already, staying with his man, doesn't get burned that often, had over a steal per game. And yeah, he could play both the point guard and shooting guard position. Some people might like him more as the point guard. Some people might like him more as the shooting guard. Obviously, has a great ability to get to the bucket though. Like a lot of the other shooting guards maybe don't. But with that being said, does find himself to be a bit less of a volume shooter than some of the guys we see here as well.
Completely, yeah. He doesn't have the career body of work as some of the other guys that we have around him right now. Even someone like Russell is definitely more consistent 20 to 25 point per game player. But to me, Shea just hasn't been given the opportunity. If you're looking at OKC's team last year, which was really his first breakout year, in his rookie year, he really didn't. He played on the Clippers. He did okay. The Clippers didn't really value him as much as they should have at the time, and they included him in that famous Paul George trade. But that was the best piece of that Paul George trade that OKC could have ever gotten. I think that Shea, at his best, tops out at very close to the level that Paul George is at right now. This is at his best. He's not best yet. He's still very young. He'll only be 22 this year. With that being said, on that OKC team last year, they were a what, sixth seed, fifth seed. They were a very good team that nobody expected them to be because they had all these veterans around him that were able to lead this team to the playoffs. Um, Shea was able to learn from all these guys. You had Chris Paul as a mentor. What better mentor can you get in this league? You had Danilo Gallinari, your power forward. Steven Adams was there. He's been around all these winners, and it really showed. I think it really rubbed off on him last year, and he was still able to get his points per game up to over 19 points on a team filled with scorers that are beyond his level. I think now in OKC, the only other person who's anywhere close to his level is Al Horford, who is more of a playmaking player to begin with, who's probably going to take more of the point guard roles. No, not like a point forward kind of role on that team, just because of the lack of playmakers that they have right now with Chris Paul leaving. And I know they just picked up George Hill, but it's not the same level. But Shea, I think he just learned so much from all those players, and it's gonna rub off on him on having such a great year. I don't see OKC making the playoffs this year, by any means, because they just don't have the same level of players that they had last year. But I see Shea getting his probably points up to like 22, 23 next year, and him really just having an all-star year. And on top of that, the guy actually plays defense. He's actually a very, very good defensive player. I put him right now actually ahead of a player like D'Angelo Russell on the defensive end. And I think that this upcoming year, he can actually put up a similar statistical level on offense as someone like Russell.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who really knows how to use his body well. In terms of obviously on defense, again, as mentioned, over a steal per game, but also tied for second in blocks for shooting guards with 0.7. And I find that very different than a guy like his Canadian counterpart, Andrew Wiggins, where if you look at them, they are both very lanky. But again, both on offense and defense, I feel like Shea uses his body a lot better. Even when he's getting to the bucket, I feel like he uses his length to his advantage a lot better than Wiggins, and he's not scared to get not too scared to get down low, even though he is kind of looks like he would be on the slimmer side. He's not a guy who gets bumped around too easily. He's a guy who hangs in there pretty well. And another thing huge with OKC, I find, with that happened last year was when you hear Chris Paul talk about that team, he always talks about Shea in the most positive light you probably ever heard Chris Paul talk about anyone. Chris Paul is a guy who everyone respects him around the league. Obviously, a guy who's the head of the players' union, but he's a guy who's very petty in his own right. So for him to actually find a liking to a guy where he calls him his brother, apparently they communicate with him every day. We did see such a big such a big jump from year 1 to 2 for Shea. Year 2 to 3, definitely, like you said, has a possibility to see him not only be a 22-23 guy, but be like a 22-6-5 guy, where he just all around seems like a great player. And on defense, we both already know what he can do as well.
100%. 100%. I'm actually very surprised that he didn't get more consideration for most improved player last year. I know that Brandon Ingram got it. Brandon Ingram had an amazing year. But Shea came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Just his overall play and the team success and how much of an integral role he was to that team success. It was fantastic. And we were talking about a player that before last year started. He was a borderline Team Canada roster player. Like if all the Team Canada stars are playing, like we've named a lot of Canadian players so far in our rankings. Tristan Thompson, Brandon Clark, recently Dylan Brooks, Andrew Wiggins. Shea just wasn't on the level of those guys. And now not only is he on the level, but he's right up there with Jamal Murray and leading that team to a potential not just an Olympic appearance, but if we have players of this level leading Team Canada, we're talking medaling at the Olympics.
Yeah.
Maybe giving the U.S. a run for their money if all their guys are actually playing it on top of their game, just because our guys would actually be trying.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, when you look back to at the 2018 NBA draft, it's one of the best drafts in recent memory. And Shea is a guy who fell to the 11th spot. Normally, when a guy falls to the 11, like you said, it takes a few years to develop. Didn't look like he was necessarily a star while he was with the Clippers. And when he gets
he was good. He was still an above average rookie.
Yeah, but when he got traded to OKC, it didn't necessarily seem like he was the key piece. It seemed like the draft picks were, and now it
Yeah,
really seems like Shea is obviously that key piece. But
yeah.
again, going back to that draft, I mean, originally it obviously goes Aiton, Bagley, Doncic, Jackson Jr., Young, and then a bunch of guys in between, six of them, guys like Colin Sexton, Wendell Carter Jr., who are also very good.
Good
But like,
players.
yeah, but I feel like if you had the fifth pick in that draft now, you would probably take, or fifth or sixth pick, depending on how you feel about Marvin Bagley, you would honestly probably take Shea at either the five or six spot right now. And that's just speaking to how talented he is.
What a great draft, though. Like, we're talking about the draft this year being potentially weak, and how maybe one player, two players are going to have an above average year and actually be productive on their teams. And we're talking there five guys that within 2 years are 20 and 10 guys, 20 and 5 guys, shooting the ball from 40%. A lot of them are playing above average defense. Like that was a true rookie movement. And you know what? We can't hit it like that every year, because then there wouldn't be bad players. The great players now would be the bad players.
Yeah, and just before we move on from Shea on that note, I honestly think we'll probably do a video soon just on that 2018 NBA draft, because even looking at the second round, there's multiple starters in it. It's actually ridiculous how good that draft was.
Subscribe and check it out.
Definitely, but we're going to move on from Shea now. We're
Of
going to go
course.
to the eight spot. So who do we have here?
Well, Shea was the 8th spot, so how about we go to the 7th spot?
That sounds
Um,
even better, to be honest.
right? Yeah, we're moving on up. Shea at number 8. That actually made a lot of sense.
There we go.
Shea can actually take over into number 6 next year if he does move up to the year I'm expecting him to have. But here at number 7, we have a player I'm actually surprised isn't higher. It's CJ McCollum. He is nothing but consistent on that Portland team. Somehow that Portland team gets zero respect. None.
Yeah, I mean, originally when you hear his name, like you said, it's a surprise to think he'd be seventh at his position because you not only know he's one of the best shooters in the league, but he's been one of the most consistent threats over the last 5 years. I don't think there's been a year that he hasn't had at least 22 points per game over the last 5 years. I could be wrong. And it just feels like every single game you know what you're going to get from CJ McCollum. Not a guy who chokes under the pressure. Obviously, the perfect number two to Damian Lillard. And it's a guy who easily could find himself in the top five, but because it's such a deep position and the things some of the other guys do are so key. That's really what sets himself apart. And I guess the fact that Damian Lillard maybe is on the team and he loses a bit of steam versus a guy like Zach
That's definitely.
yeah, who definitely gets to run up kind of the stat line around it. Because there's no saying that CJ couldn't have a stat line or better than Zach Levine. Just at this point, because he doesn't, I would say that's the only reason he falls so hard.
I couldn't agree with you more. If we're talking about talent, I think CJ is probably more talented than someone like Zach Levine.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
what to me, CJ, he's probably the second best mid-range shooter in the NBA, right behind DeMar DeRozan. He's really, really good in the mid-range. He's lethal. Um, so to me, he's like a DeMar DeRozan who can shoot a three-pointer. He might not be lights out at a three-pointer. He's not going to be Kyle Korver or Joe Harris out there, but he can still shoot it at league average or above league average in most years. He does average just over 20 points per game. The main reason I think he is behind a player like Zach Levine, though, like you mentioned, being behind Damian Lillard takes a lot of opportunities away. CJ's definitely plays similar to a point guard role as well, so it's kind of difficult to have that many touches going to the guards. But on top of that, it's just hasn't shown the success that they need to show in the last couple of years. It seems like Damian Lillard is one of the best players in this league. He shows it day in and day out, and yet Portland's not a top team. It seems like CJ McCollum, day in and day out, produces, and he does. And they both played fairly good defense. We consider them probably the best backcourt in the league right now.
Oh, definitely the best one-two punch for sure.
But where's that bringing them? It's not like they have a bad front court either. Last year they had a Whiteside, and the Whiteside's not really doesn't exactly put up stats, but they might be empty to team success. But they have a pretty good front court. They have pretty good wings. They're led by the best backcourt in the league. CJ McCollum's an amazing player, an amazing shooter. He's a prototypical shooting guard, but they just can't get it done. So that lack of team success, and even when they do make the playoffs, that lack of being able to make it past the first round is why he's that low for me.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like, I wouldn't say that they necessarily have a lack of team success because if you do look, so CJ McCollum won the most improved player in 2015, 2016. And if you look at the years after that, they finished eighth in 20, they finished the eighth year after that, which definitely seems justified. Then they finished eighth this year, but the 2 years in between that, they finished third in the conference in both years. And one of those 2 years, they did make the conference finals, and they just ran into the Warriors. So it's like it's not a team that can't win in the playoffs. It's just a team that runs into a lot of good teams. I feel like they shouldn't have got swept by the Pelicans a few years ago in the playoffs. That's something that was just disastrous. But in terms of being able, I think, to go to the conference finals 2 years ago, Damian Lillard hitting that shot over Paul George. Hate to take away the fire from
A couple
McCollum.
years ago now, though.
Yeah, it's only 2 years ago though. They hit that's one playoff run that didn't go good for them, and that was also the bubble. I think when it comes to winning games in the playoffs, both of them are just absolute killers. But I agree that McCollum's lack of getting over the hump in terms of being a really good player versus a superstar is just what keeps him here. Because like Portland, they're a really good team, but they don't seem to find themselves in the top five in terms of contenders.
So to me, I think if you're talking about how they've had a great team success, they're coming off of a year where they had a losing record in in an NBA where a winning record can be had pretty much anywhere. Almost every team around them and underneath them are teams that are rebuilding right now. They're building off of young people. They're up and comers. They're not a team that's getting older and older every year and not going anywhere. This team's pretty much maxed out with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard leading the team. They are a potential top five contender, yes, any given year. But like last year, it's not like CJ and Dame were hurt. They played. CJ played every single game. And I know that if your other guys are hurt, like Nurkic was hurt, sure, that makes you lose a couple more games. But you were 4 games under 500. In a different sport, in baseball, if you're not at 600, you're not making the playoffs. Like Portland's not going to be a serious threat at 34 and 39.
No,
And I just don't. Like I see that CJ and Dame might be a little overrated in that sense. That's why for me I had Shea, and I actually had CJ at 9th place in my list.
you have to think about it too, though, where in the last 5 years, again, they do have two conference finals appearances. And how many other people on these lists can we say that about? Not a lot. So you can't judge team success based off
Make
last year
make
during
the playoffs.
They what do you
Make the playoffs.
what do you mean? They have two conference finals appearances in the last 5 years.
Make the playoffs right now.
They
Last year they were not a very good team, and that was
they made the playoffs. They finished eighth in the conference. They've made the playoffs every single year since CJ McCollum has been the most improved player. And the only time that they lost in the first round twice. Once was to the Warriors whenever they had their Splash Brothers year, and the other time was to the Lakers this year. We're again losing to the Los Angeles Lakers in this year's playoffs. Is that a shame? Like no, they've never missed
but
the
like
playoffs with either of these guys. I agree.
I mean, have a winning record. Have a winning record.
Again, that's 1 year. They finished third 2 years ago. They finished third the year before that as well. So like they had two.
Other teams are getting better, and they're not getting better. They're getting worse.
I think they're getting. I don't think they got worse. They got Robert Covington. They got Carmelo. And Nurkic is going to be healthy. They didn't get worse.
Lost Whiteside. Carmelo's getting older. That Colin's not the player he once was. Nurkic was still coming off an injury. We don't know what he can prove. I don't see them contend. I don't see them winning a championship.
Hey, we'll save this for our season preview discussion. But obviously, back to CJ. Yeah, like
CJ's still a great player. He's offensively, he's DeMar DeRozan who can shoot a 3-pointer.
yeah, that pretty much justifies him with the spot he's in. He's not going to fall out of the top 10, and
No, he's a top 10 player for the rest of his career.
definitely.
So moving on from CJ, I apologize, CJ. You're still a very good player. But moving on from CJ, we
Just
have here at number 6. Yeah, I just get a little tested sometimes. Here at number 6, though, we have Zach Levine from the Bulls. Levine's a great player. Whenever we think of Levine, we definitely don't think of a defensive maestro, but offensively, wow, he's gifted.
Yeah, and even saying that about the steals, I mean, this is a guy who's or the defense. He was a guy who was fourth in defensive rebounds and third in steals among shooting guards.
Not bad.
No, so in terms of being able to do the things that are counted defensively, he's clearly able to do them. In terms of maybe being able to stay with some of the other shooting guards who are a lot more athletic in terms of quickness off the ball in the league, that's where
That's where
he's
it
going to
comes from.
struggle in terms of because like he is super athletic. We've seen the things he can do in the dunk contest, not a matter of that. It just seems like he's a guy who maybe, like we said, can't keep up with a James Harden, with a Devin Booker, with guys like that. It seems like he would, like you said, struggle on the defensive end. I agree.
It, I don't know if you can put up, like, he had a great year last year. He put up 25 and a half points. Like, we're talking the same level year, if not better than someone like Brandon Ingram last year. Like, he had a fantastic offensive year. It's not like he was shooting the ball horribly either. He shot it fairly well. I don't know what to take here. Like, is it pure empty stats because that team was just horrid, or is this actually what he's going to be on a consistent level? Can he replicate this on a contender?
Yeah, and I mean that's the hard thing because even to this day, it almost seems like a disbelief that Zach Levine has gotten this good. Because there was a time that he was a backup point guard on a team, and even though he was good, it didn't seem like he was going to be the guy. When he went to
Minnesota?
Minnesota, it didn't seem like he was necessarily going to be what he became now.
I thought he'd be a 6 man, like a Jordan Clarkson or something, or Lou Williams.
Exactly. So maybe that's where some of the doubt in Zach Levine does come because, I mean, ultimately, the guy has pretty much at the top of every major statistical category for shooting guards. I mean, he was fourth in points, he was fifth in rebounds, eighth in assists, third in steals, fourth in defensive rebounds. He was third in turnovers as well, but we see that with all the top guys. So I think the main difference with Levine that sets him apart from a guy like McCollum, like we spoke about, is the fact that he does do other things in the game opposed to just really score the ball. Like I said, he is able to be a bit more of a playmaker, still rebounds pretty well. He's a bit more hard nosed, he's a bit more athletic than McCollum. But in terms of maybe staying ahead of a guy like Shea, I don't know how long he'll do that. But I do think this year, based on his ranking for me, obviously, that he'll probably put up a pretty similar year to that last year. And it's going to be either a top five or borderline top five spot again for Zach Levine, just based on his performance this year. So that's where we have him.
Yeah, no, can't agree with you more. To me, he's looking right now like Devin Booker was 2 years ago or a year ago. Hopefully, they can keep putting it up, keep being consistent on it, and I think the only way he really does crack the top 5 for me though is if his team starts contending. If he's the best player on a team that's in a playoff spot, or in the hunt at the very least, now we're talking potential of him cracking our top 5. Because our top 5, they're very good players. not like Zach Levine's a bad player. Zach Levine is very, very skilled, a very good scorer, one of the best in the league. But you can't just be one way. You can't be one faceted. If you're going to be only one way player, only an offensive player, you better be the best damn offensive player in the league.
Yeah, and I mean,
Other than that, it doesn't cut it on its own.
no, and that's just it. Looking at the guys left, there'd be one guy who I'd say is pretty much only offensively minded, and like you said, he's the best offensively minded guy.
That's
Versus
the thing.
versus all the other guys, they're actually very good on the two-way end when you look at it. Even a guy that might surprise some people when I do come out and say it. But with that being said, like you said too, he hasn't established himself on a winning team.
Yep.
Where again, all of the guys ahead of them, even someone who hasn't been maybe consistent winning team, they did find a way to do it at least by the end of last year. And Zach Levine's like that Bulls team never really did much with him. The Timberwolves team, they might have made a playoff appearance with him. I can't remember off the top of my head based on when he was there. But it wasn't because of Zach Levine, right? It was because of Town. so it's because of other guys there.
Wiggins.
Yeah, so it's a guy who hasn't really, when like you're kind of suggesting, when he's the guy, his team doesn't really have much success based off it. So yeah, it could very well be empty stats, but the empty stats are so good, he still finds himself near a top five spot.
Oh, for sure, and that's the difference between him and someone like Sexton. Like we were talking about the difference between Sexton and Levine earlier. Levine is a upper echelon offensive player. And as you pointed out there, he's not a bad defensive player. He's worked on that his whole career. He's gotten better. He's not going to be. He's not a top 3 in the league. He's not a top 10 in the league for that matter. The eye test kind of gives us that, for example. He might get blown by some of the faster players, but he's an average defender at the very least. So he puts up a lot of minutes, so he does get the defensive stats, and he's okay on defense. But he does have to improve on defense or become like a 30-point per game guy to move into the top 5.
Yeah, or at very least become more than just the, like I would say, average outside shooter, guy who's never shot above 40% any of the years. I don't even think he's hit 39% looking at it quickly here. So if he could hit the three at like a 40% eclipse for a year, maybe get up to like 28 points per game, like you said, 6 assists, maybe instead of this kind of borderline 4,
Or
and
3.
continue to improve on the defensive end, and actually get Chicago to a playoff spot, then it's a discussion of if he's top 5 or not. But for now, it's
It's
good.
not a discussion.
Yeah, it's really just going to be him and Shea fighting out even for the 6th spot. I think for next year, if I had to predict moving forward. But I do think this year, this specific year, Zach Levine's will do enough to keep the 6th spot justified for where he is now.
Yep, can't agree with you more unless something crazy happens and he's not cracking that top 5. Top 5 just another level. And Shea and Zach are gonna battle out this year. CJ's gonna battle out, especially if Portland comes back and has 3rd overall year as they did 2 years ago, as you reminded me there. So those guys are gonna battle it out for those 6 to 8 spot. Russell's gonna be close to there too, and then the rest of the guys, I just don't see them entering that conversation right now. Things could change though. 1 year can make a big difference, right? Moving forward on that, so moving into our top 5 at the shooting guard position, just after Zach Levine, we actually have a player that, if you're talking to me 2 years ago, he is number 2 on this list. Talking to me 3 years ago, he's number 2 on this list. 4 years ago, he's number 2 on this list, if you get what I'm saying. But we have Paul George here. He was a 3rd overall in MVP voting as little as 2 years ago. And he's not even 3rd overall on our shooting guard list. He's number 5.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, when we talked about Pascal Siakam, we felt like the bubble hurt his ranking a lot. And clearly, this is something that happened to Paul George too.
It didn't just hurt his ranking, it hurt his reputation.
Yeah, I mean, he came out in a recent interview and he said something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm going to return to my MVP season," and people are just like, "What do you mean?" Like they forget that 2 years ago he put up 28, 8.5, and he did it on a very efficient clip.
And he played one of the best defensive players in the league as well.
Yeah, definitely. Paul George, always one of the best defensive players.
Him and Kawhi.
Yeah, and that's why they went out and got him, right? They thought it was just the absolute perfect match in terms of the backcourt slash wing guys being able to defend any and everyone. Obviously, especially guys like LeBron James, and it just last year didn't happen, especially in the playoffs. I don't have his playoff stats off the top of my head, but if I did,
3 games.
I want to say maybe 14 points per game, if I'm not mistaken. It just did not look pretty for Paul George at any point in that playoff run. Maybe 1 or 2 games were okay, but I don't know what happened to playoff P, because when it was with Indiana, we always just raved about Paul George come playoff time.
Especially against LeBron back in the day when he was with Miami. And
Yeah, those
Paul George was young.
Yeah, those series were something to look forward to. And last year, it was laughable how bad he was. Not only on the fact how bad he was, but the fact how he was just in so much denial on how bad he was doing. He just wanted to keep shooting and just wanted to get out of the funk. And
So that's what a player of that level is supposed to do, right?
yeah, but it just wouldn't happen. And I feel like that's why it hurts him so much, because we know between all of the guys left, he's the best defensive player. And he has the capability to be at least better than the worst offensive player of this bunch. But of the bunch, he was the worst offensive player last year.
he still averaged 26 and 4 in the playoffs.
Yeah.
20.6 rebounds and 4 assists. Still not bad. And he still got a 1.5 steals per game. He actually shot the ball decently well. 34% from three, not the greatest there, but he didn't actually as bad as what we think he did. It's just that whole team collapsed.
Yeah.
That whole team collapsed. Like that 3 games in a row to Denver, that made him look bad. And it really made the whole organization look laughable. And to me, one of the biggest reasons why George went down was, yes, he didn't have that MVP level year last year. He still played really good defense, but he didn't have it offensively at least. But to me, it's how he handled this offseason. Like he didn't come out of that bubble with that meant like rubbing off in fans' minds that I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna get better, I'm gonna improve from this. He came out of it being like, I am the best anyways. Fucking Doc Rivers, who needs him? He was holding me back, and like he has to admit that he had a bad year. He has to admit that he does have the potential to become a top 3, top 5 player on this planet. But right now, he's not even in the top 10 conversation. So he's really got to suck it up mentally and go back and just put in the work and show us that he is that top player. Because him just talking shit and saying all the stuff he's going to say right now is just hurting his reputation, and it's going to hurt his game.
Yeah, and it's almost too like I understand that Paul George could definitely shoot the ball post All-Star break as well, shot 46% from the three. But at the same time, if this is a guy playing shooting guard, he's 6'8". Like there's no reason that Paul George shouldn't be just bodying up every single shooting guard he's matched with, getting down low, bumping him a few times and doing a turnaround midway shot where like it's the easiest game. Like he should turn himself into Carmelo Anthony on the offensive end because the guys he's playing are going to be so much smaller than him based on where he's going to line up. And I just don't think he's going to do it. But if he could definitely have another 20 to 30 point game per year. I wish he used that element of his game more.
I don't see him really getting to that 28 level anymore. Not on that team. That team just has too many scores. That takes away from his overall shot attempts. His usage goes down. But I think if he can get to 23 or 24 and still provide a top level defense, him and Kawhi, like if they beat Denver last year, we're having a different conversation. If they beat Denver in 5 games, they go into the Western Conference Finals against LA rested. This is not the conversation we're having right now.
No,
But it's reality. This is where we are right now. And until they prove it to us that they can be a little bit more level-headed and not lose 3 games in a row like that, do you know who would not lose 3 games in a row like that?
LeBron James.
LeBron James.
No, and I mean, with that being said, too, a lot of people obviously where the whole playoff performance, like you said, in total might not be that bad. It's really the fact of a lot of people remember that game 7 where he did shoot 4 for 16. They did blow that lead, a pretty substantial lead too, and he only had 10 points. He had 5 turnovers. I mean, if you take away the turnovers to points, he had 5 points in a game 7 deciding factor game. And there, that whole series, I mean, he puts up 10 points, and then 3 games before that, he also puts up 10 points, where he puts up 26 and 33 in between. But like, you can't have out of 4 games, you put up 10 points and expect to be more than, like you said, a top 5 guy at your position. The fact he's even top 5 speaks to wonders how good he normally is. Because like, you can't put Paul George less than this, honestly. He's too good. But based on, like you said, the consistency factor, the factor that he's obviously not the number 1 on the team anymore, it really just isn't going to allow him really to move above any of these guys anytime soon. I don't think either. I don't think he's going to have a better year than any of these guys, obviously based on this ranking. But I'm with you also in the fact that I don't think next year is going to be above these guys. I just wish that he slowed down his offensive game more, like I said, and just posted guys up. Because like when you're 6'8" at shooting guard, like I said, he could shoot over anyone at that position, and I don't understand why he takes so many threes. Not saying he takes an astronomical amount, but he'd rather pull up and take a 3 than play in the post, I feel.
I didn't like that Clippers system last year either. For me, and you're talking that he lost opportunities by going to the Clippers playing with Kawhi. The year before, he put up 28 points per game, 28 points per game, third in MVP voting. You know who his running mate was? Russell Westbrook.
Yep.
Like, everyone's shitting on Russell Westbrook these days. They call a horrible player. Guess what? People in Washington, they like him. He's not that bad of a guy, and as much as he does take a really high percentage of shots, doesn't shoot the 3-pointer very well. It just goes to show that his drives and dishes that he was able to do with Paul George made Paul George into the best player he ever was in his career. He only ever had 2 other seasons besides that season above 21 points per game. 21 points, which is what he had last year, 21 and a half points, is actually more than his career average. That's all we should ever expect from Paul George. Put him beside an amazing playmaker, maybe a different story. They don't have a playmaker on that team. They do ISO ball purely. They literally do not even have a point guard on that team. That team's just not well built for Paul George. They're well built defensively. They're built to destroy teams defensively. And I hope that works for him, because like this offensively, we're not going to see the best version of Paul George on that Clippers team.
Definitely. I mean, his career averages do take a bit of a dip because the first 5 years he did only have over 20 points per game once. He has had over 23 points per game 2 times before. He only had 1 year that was under 22 in the last 5 years, I believe. But yeah, so not a guy who's consistently is believed to be a 28 point per game guy. But like you said, if he could put up that 24 about a game like he did in Indiana around 23.7, 24, definitely all the Clippers should be able to ask for him based on who else they have.
Completely. But his defense should actually put him higher on the list alone. But it's a bit of recency bias that last time we seen Paul George play. But it is what it is. We witnessed it, and it imprinted on our brains.
Definitely.
Well, moving on from Paul George, Georgie, get up there. You don't deserve to be the number 5 spot. You should really be in the number 2 spot on this list. But just past Paul George, here at the number 4 spot, we have a guy who's nowhere near the defensive player that Paul George is. Nowhere near the defensive player that CJ McCollum is. And but well, we were talking earlier about a player like Zach Levine, about how if you're gonna make it into the top 5, you either need to be around his level but raise his game defensively, or raise his points per game to over 30. Guess what? This guy did. Bradley Beal here at number 4. He's probably not going to do it with another running mate there like Westbrook. Again, George had a career year with Westbrook. We're just talking about that. It's not that bad of a time. Being on a team with a player that can drive and dish that as well as Westbrook, it's going to leave Beal open a lot. Open like he's never been. That being said, Beal could be even higher if he was better defensively. The man didn't even make an All-Star game last year. He put up 30 points per game, but his team didn't reflect that. I just wish he was a little better on defense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's a completely false accusation for Bradley Beal, where he's actually one of the better defenders at the shooting guard position. He was a guy who was tied for 5th in steals with 1.3, but not only that, he's one of the strongest guys at the shooting guard position, and he has been since he's come out of college. He's huge. He loves getting down and gritty. He's not a guy who gets burned on the defensive end night after night. Like, of course, if you have a team that is struggling, and yes, you have other guys like Thomas Bryant and company who are
that whole team was struggling defensively.
They were, but Bradley Beal is not a bad defender hit alone by any means. Like when Bradley Beal has like even James, like we'd say the same about Harden. He wants to play defense, of course he can. To say that about a player, of course, not what you want to say. But Bradley Beal, it's not something that I sit here and would say, oh, if he was better on defense, he'd be so much higher. I just think he's not higher because right now that team isn't that good, and everyone else has such a huge contribution on teams that have looked really good lately.
Well, we haven't seen someone else from a different team in a sunny state yet, but that player didn't have a better team success year and had less in almost every statistical category, and we haven't seen him yet. I think Beal as much as you're right, it's like statistically you look at it and you think, wow, this is not bad on defense, yeah. But I think having people like Davis Bertans and Thomas Bryan, Dale Lowe, just showcase that without Wall there, I think Wall's an above average defender. And without Wall there and without having the safety nets that he used to have in the past behind him, I think that the other team was really hurt on that sense, especially when you compare him to different players that we have around this area. And maybe that's just because of how horrible they were on the interior. But that interior just wasn't it. Every person that he let got by him, but whether he let him by or they blew past him, whatever the case may be, maybe it didn't. Maybe it happened just as much as it happened to any other player, but it just felt like they were scoring every single time.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of things where obviously, like if we do look, like you are correct in the fact that if you look at Bradley Beal in the 2019-2020 season, he was one of the worst defensive real plus minus players. But that's not something that has been consistent over his career. He's usually average or better than average at the very worst. It's really just been the last year and a half or so that he struggled on the defensive end, not only because he has no counterparts to support him, there's no help defense being played, whatever it may be, but his usage rate is so much higher now that they're
He's
relying
tired.
on so much exactly, and they're relying on him so much on the offensive end that when you're being relied on night after night on that end and there's no result on the defensive end from anyone else, like you have the mindset of why would I even play defense? Like I know I could go bucket for bucket. These guys aren't helping me anyway. Why would I bust my ass? I'm already doing it on one
Yeah.
end. So it's clearly that's where it is becoming a bit more staggering, which is concerning in its own right. Where you would love a guy who on every play is out there hustling, he's jumping for loose balls and whatever it may be. And Bradley Beal, like you said, he almost seems a bit lackadaisical last year on the defensive end.
Lackadaisical. I like it.
But it's not something, yeah, like I said, that is consistent. Like overall, I would rank Beal as a good defender. Like I said, he's very strong. It's always been a huge thing for him, even coming out of college. But yeah, I mean, on offense, it can't be denied, right? He was second in
He's
points.
amazing.
Yeah, second in points at 30.6, and I believe post All-Star break he was actually first. He had above 35 points per game. He was also third in assists at shooting guard with 6.1, which is something I feel like a lot of people forget about him. And not a bad rebound either by any means. So overall, just I'd say Bradley Beal is very well rounded. I would love to see his defensive stats come back to center so people don't think that he is such a bad defender because, like you said recently, that has been the knock on him. Because a guy who puts up 30 points per game should easily be two on this list.
It blows me away that he was an All-Star 2 years ago. He was an All-Star 3 years ago. His team still made the playoffs last year, or if they didn't, they were ninth place. Blows me away that like he didn't get an All-Star nod last year. It just like even when you're putting someone like Middleton against him. Middleton was an All-Star last year. I know that he was on a way better team, but Bradley Beal put up 30 points.
Yeah,
The
like
only player to put up 30 points and not become an All-Star.
yeah, and I mean it really is just the post All-Star numbers. It's unfortunate when it happened, but I mean 36 points per game post All-Star, 29 pre. But even then, putting up 29 points per game,
29.
that doesn't get you an All-Star nod. I mean,
And he had it the year before at less points. He had it the year before that, even less points. And it's not like Washington was a top 4 seed.
yeah, no. And I mean, personally, Bradley Beal always been one of my personal favorite players.
Oh, I know.
So it's a guy who, again, the fact that he's in his prime, and we're obviously seeing that team decline definitely sucks. I hope they look better this year with Russell Westbrook. And if that is the case, we can maybe see Beal go into the top three because I don't think he's
Yeah.
necessarily a lot worse than these guys. Like you
No.
said, though, last year with that horrible defensive rating and Washington struggling on that end, it hurts him a bit, clearly, because like, he was so good on the offensive end, and somehow he still finds himself below two guys that he was actually a lot better than, even though they are great in their own rights.
I think that if it's tough, right? Because Beal probably had a better year than most of the guys. He had one of the better years of anyone in the league, especially with his post All-Star break numbers, bubble numbers. He was not a bad player. But it's let's just say I think that he's going to keep being a good player on that team. and I think that he's gonna have some success on that team, and I think him and Westbrook are actually gonna fit very well. But we have to see it happen first, right? And that's what it comes down to for me.
All right, so who do you have at number 3 then?
So just after Bradley Beal, who's number 4, and Paul George, number 5, to round out the top 5, we get into the top 3. Unlike other positions like small forward, there isn't a top 3 that really stands out aside from the rest of the top 5. And the top 5 on their own are just great, amazing players. But it's really comes down to personal preference and how they played 10 the year last year. So this one at number 3, Donovan Mitchell from the Utah Jazz. And I think Mitchell and Murray were going to town against each other last year. During those playoffs, Mitchell averaged like 36 points in the playoffs. It was amazing. He just showcased that before those playoffs started, I would have had him at number 5, behind those 2 other players. But he just showed that he right now is the better player on the better team.
Yeah, and I mean that's really what it came down to where, like you said, when you look at Donovan Mitchell, and if you were just to look at that stat line, you'd be pretty content putting him 5th, where he's a guy who he isn't necessarily he's not the best defender. He's gotten better over the years, but he's not bad at this point, and he does have a really good ability, obviously, on the offensive end. But to say he every year would be better than a guy like Bradley Beal, Paul George, it's definitely really hard. But like you said, the ability of him last year to show up in the playoffs and really prove himself as a winner, even though they didn't win. It was a situation where if he wasn't playing against Jamal Murray, it would have been lights out. It would have been one of the best recent playoff performances we've seen. But like I said, it really showed his ability that a lot of people in Utah already felt he had, is that he's just a huge difference maker. That's why they gave up Gordon Hayward. That's why they're comfortable, because they know when it comes down to it, Donovan Mitchell could really win them some games, and he clearly has been.
And definitely. And one thing that we stand them apart from like Bradley Beal. And we were talking before that Bradley Beal could easily be with his step points per game that he put up 30. We're talking 36 for after the All-Star break last year. Like that's a way bigger amount of games than what Mitchell did in the playoffs. But team success has a lot to come into that, right? Jazz have been very successful with Mitchell as their best player. And I was just talking about how Beal lacks defensively. Because where he does miss a guy, where he does say has a mental lapse, say a guy blows by him, and because he doesn't have an interior presence, that guy scores 9 times out of 10. Well, Mitchell doesn't have that problem. Is Mitchell definitely 100% better than Bradley Beal on defense? I don't know. I don't need to know. Mitchell has the people behind him. Rudy Gobert, overall, that Jazz system is very defensively minded, and they can erase a mistake by him. I'm not saying he makes mistakes often, but I'm saying you don't see those mistakes statistically as much as you would see it with a player like Bradley Beal, just based on the players that are around him. With that being said, Mitchell, is he a bad offensive player? No. Did he put up as much as Bradley Beal last year? No, but generally, I'd say they're very, very similar on the offensive end. I'd say everyone from the 3 to 5 range, even including Paul George in that category, are very good offensive players that can put up 25 points per game on any given year. But that defensive prowess that Mitchell has shown in the last couple of years by being part of that great defensive squad is what kind of made him to that next level. And of course, that bubble performance that really showed us that he can be that 35 point per game player if he ever needs to be, but they just don't need him to do it most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic almost that the support of someone else can help you gain a ranking, but it's definitely true that the help defense that Mitchell is able to gain through guys like Gobert definitely helps him avoid being a worse real plus minus player. Not saying that he would necessarily be a bad one, but saying that he does, like you said, gain some benefit from these other guys versus a guy like Beal doesn't. And even though Beal did put up more points per game, the fact that we've seen Mitchell do it in the hardest element possible. Also, yes, Bradley Beal has had a couple good playoff runs, but he hasn't had, like you said, a 36-point game, a 36 per game playoff series like Donovan Mitchell did last year. And it's not even like Mitchell, like a lot of other series we talked about. did it on like let's say 43 minutes per game. This is a guy who's still only playing 37 minutes per game, which is close to doable in the regular season. Definitely still going to play a couple less minutes, but the fact he was pretty much getting a point per minute, that's on a guy like Giannis's level, who is obviously number one on his specific list. And the fact that he was also doing other things too, like he still had 5 and 5 in the other categories too. So it's not like he was just keeping the ball and
Yep.
passing. He did have 4 turnovers per game, but at the same time, that's because again he was doing everything for that Utah Jazz team. And this goes to show that maybe on a specific year, Donovan Mitchell might be in the company of a guy like James Harden as a 30 point per game guy over an entire year because he's shown the ability to do it at least over a playoff series. So at least we know somewhat there's potential for that.
When it counts, he's shown that he shows up, right? And that's something that we never thought we would see in that Utah squad. Whenever it comes down to the offense in the playoffs, whenever you're not a top tier offensive team, typically historically top tier defensive teams don't make it for far deep runs. Historically, we're like maybe the Detroit Pistons from 05 or 5 um, buck that trend, but other than that, um, Utah needed to know they had a player that can step up and do this. And I don't think they knew it before going into last year. I thought they were really, really hoping it in Mitchell. But now that they know it, it just unlocks them to a whole another contender status at this point.
Yeah, I feel like they already knew it personally. That's why they had so much hope for him. I feel like anyone you heard speak to out of Utah knew he already had it. I think this was just him
But
showing
not
to
to this level, though.
Oh, no, I don't think anyone thinks like even if you said, hey, if you said, okay, for example, just think like even if you told me James Harden 2 years ago put up 36 points per game, off the top of my head, I'd be like, no, he didn't. Like, but you look at it, he actually did. Like, you don't expect a guy to put up 36 points per game over a number of games, but clearly when they're at that level, they're able to do those things. And Donovan Mitchell, we're expecting him this year to actually improve clearly on his average of like last couple of years he's been between a 22 to 24 point per game guy. Clearly we have
He'll be 25 next year.
exactly. We have him above Bradley Beal for a reason. We think he's going to be a bit better. We have him above Paul George for a reason. We think he's going to be a bit better. So we'll see how much improvement he makes over the whole year. But we're confident it's going to be an improvement, and I'm excited to see it.
Yep, and I was very happy to see that you had him that highly ranked as well because I definitely think highly of him, and the fact that we're on the same page on that one was really good. The Spider Mitchell,
Who do we have
good guy.
above the all-star, the superstar Donovan Mitchell? I mean, we don't have a
Well,
super.
now it gets no fun because if anyone's actually watching, if you guys are watching them all, then you're gonna find out that there's only two people in your head still, unless. Okay, spoiler alert, everyone. Luka Doncic is a point guard. He gets 10 assists per game. He is a point guard.
He's on a team that has
Point guard.
point guards.
They got rid of JJ Barea. The only point guard they have is Jalen Brunson. Doncic is the point guard, okay? So now that we got that out of the way, now in your little pretty little mind, you only have two people in your head. Okay. Well, now at number 2, we have a little guy out in Arizona, Devin Booker, 70 point per game All-Star before. He's finally on the level that we thought he could be. And with this team next year, like he played fantastic in the bubble. And with this team with Chris Paul, I don't see him regressing. You don't see anyone regress beside Chris Paul. No one.
No, exactly. And it's a guy who, like you said, everyone was excited to see when he was really going to take that next step because everyone had such high hopes for Devin Booker after that 70-point performance, whether it was forced or not. The fact that he's clearly one of the best pure scorers we have in the league today. A lot of people obviously compare him to a guy like Kobe Bryant, where every time the ball goes up, you're confident it's going in, no matter who's guarding him. That's really what Devin Booker could do. And even then, the things he does aside from just scoring, yeah, he was 30 points for shooting guard, but he's also second in assists with 6.5. To me, though, it is how efficient of a scorer he is, where usually when we talk about guys like this, they take a lot of shots. He's a guy who makes a lot of shots. He was first in field goal percentage for players who took 15 or more shots, second in field goal percentage for players who took 10 or more shots. He had a 91% free throw percentage, first in the league for anyone with 5 or more attempts. He was one of the top real plus minus players on the list, despite playing on a team that for most of the year was a non-playoff team. So, I mean, what he does on the offensive end, it just really isn't touched by anyone, maybe except for the guy above him on this list.
Yeah, he definitely outshines everyone. And if he was, I'm not saying he's a bad defensive player. Of course, if he was a better defensive player, then Phoenix probably would have been a better team the last couple of years. That was one of his knocks on why he wasn't considered a top echelon player, even though he's been putting up 23 points for the last 4 years in a row. Plus, he's been putting up 24. I think it was 23, 25, then 26 and 26 now. So he's definitely been consistent on the offensive level. Defensively, he's not that bad. But really, I hear a lot of people say that this is the closest person that Chris Paul is going to come to have been playing with Kobe. And that probably is very accurate. Devin Booker and Kobe Bryant have a very similar game. Devin Booker is better at certain things than Kobe Bryant even was. Overall, is Kobe a better player? Yes, of course Kobe's a better player. Don't get me wrong. But if Devin Booker was able to get his defense to an all-NBA level, which Kobe was, so was Michael, so was LeBron. That's what puts these guys to another level. So if Devin Booker is able to get his defense to that level, I don't know if he ever will, but if he ever gets it to the level of even someone like Paul George, we're talking about a surefire Hall of Famer. He probably already is right now, but we're talking like he would enter that top 15 of all time kind of conversation because he offensively, that's kind of where he belongs. He's right next to James Harden in the best shooters in this league category, the best pure scorers. He'll get up points no matter what. And that's why I think that Chris Paul is going to unlock another level, just like he probably would have unlocked another level with Kobe. As much as Kobe was a fantastic player, he never really played with the point guard to the level of Chris Paul. Steve Nash is the best point guard Kobe ever played with, and Steve Nash was on the last year of his career. Chris Paul and Devin Booker is going to look nice. I'm really excited to see what Devin Booker can bring this year, and I think he's going to learn a lot defensively from the player like Chris Paul. That team's going to be a better for it. They're going to be a playoff team. We were talking about that before. Booker and Paul are both going to be all-stars next year, and I'm expecting a career year from Devin Booker.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the big thing with Booker opposed to a guy like Kobe. Obviously, Booker, I'd say, is maybe even better at the catch and shoot, but he obviously does still have the ability to create his own shot as well. And it's a guy who I think the biggest thing he's going to learn from a guy like Chris Paul isn't necessarily, or he's going to benefit from Chris Paul, isn't necessarily going to be in terms of the statistical improvement. He might still get better in that regard, but it's really going to be the difference of showing him how to win. Where yes, I
Yeah,
know Chris Paul hasn't won a championship, but in reality,
he's
Devin,
consistent.
yeah, but in reality too, Devin Booker did have Ricky Rubio passing to him last year. Like it's not like we can't say that Devin Booker hasn't played with a point guard who doesn't have vision, who can't find him whenever
No,
it is, because we saw it last year and we saw him again have his best year. And Ricky Rubio as well led the NBA in assists, if I'm not wrong. So again, that's something that both Chris Paul and Devin Booker are going to benefit from each other a lot from. So I'm really excited how that's going to.
LeBron and more assists.
LeBron had more assists, so Ricky Rubio would have been for point guard, would have had the most assists. But regardless, it's a guy who clearly benefits his point guards in terms of actually being able to convert the passes into an assist, into a made shot. And Devin Booker clearly going to benefit from Chris Paul, obviously, in terms of finding him when he's open, but also showing him how to really be a leader and to actually win when it matters.
How to be a player in this league.
Yeah, like I really, if you look at the Phoenix team last year, we talked about Oubre, there's a couple other guys as well. There is a huge gap in the stats they put up in their wins and their losses. Even Booker, he had 29 in the wins, 23 in the losses. And that's something I think Chris Paul, where a lot of other players, we see a guy like Russell, a lot of these players, they're consistent in the wins and
Yep.
losses. And I think Devin Booker will become consistent in both because that team is going to become a lot better of a mold now.
And they're gonna be a much better team now, right? And we're expecting bigger and better things. Because even if you put up a similar year and they're a top 6 team in their conference, that's a really really good year, and that puts Devin Booker in the MVP conversation. It will legitimately get him MVP votes. So I'm expecting big things from him, and I think he's a top 10. He's working his way into the top 10 in this whole league. I think he's there right now, and I don't think he's going to want to give up that spot.
Yeah, and it's a situation where even though we say 2 to 5 at this position, unlike other positions, may actually be interchangeable, I would be confident saying Devin Booker, if it wasn't for the guy at 1, would probably be number 1 maybe for the next 2 to 3 years because he is still going to improve, and we know what he is. He's the best scorer other than the guy above him.
Well, we keep talking about the guy above him. Devin Booker, you're a great player. You're number 2 in this league. You could become number 1. You probably will become number 1 as this other player kind of ages out. But we have James Harden, the number 1 shooting guard. Woo! Who would have guessed it?
Who would
It's
have?
not like he's the best shooting guard since Michael Jordan at scoring. Yeah.
So enthusiastic, but yeah, I feel like a lot of people, when you hear the names, when you say something like that, they're immediately gonna be like, "Oh my God, no, Kobe was better." But like you said, if you look at the numbers in terms of what's on the board, James Harden, scoring wise, is actually the best shooting guard we've seen, actually the best player we've seen since Michael Jordan. And I mean,
Offensively,
yeah,
at shooting,
exactly, scoring,
scoring
exactly.
buckets.
Exactly. It's a guy who, when you look at in terms of the points per game, last year, yeah, he was 30 in points per game, but the year before that, again, 36 points per game, as I mentioned in the previous clip. That's just, I didn't even remember that happened because in my mind, that's just so unfathomable. That's something that
And
you'd
guess what? He wasn't even the MVP.
exactly, because again, scoring is really, and even though he does other things, scoring is really just what he's known for. But yeah, like that season was seventh all time between the NBA and ABA in terms of points per game in a season. In the modern
And
era,
like we're talking about like all time. We're talking about since like the 60s, 70s, where
James,
people were like where there was one person on the court who scored 65 points and the rest of the team scored 18.
exactly.
Like this stuff doesn't happen anymore. Like
No,
I remember seeing something about it was the stat. I can't think of what it was at this point, but it was essentially it was Daryl Morey was the one that was backing this up last year. It was someone that was chirping James Harden, or he was putting James Harden on the same level as Michael Jordan, and he said that there was a 5 year of James Harden's prime with the Houston Rockets compared with 5 years of Michael Jordan's prime with the Chicago Bulls, and James Harden has actually put up better offensive numbers. Okay, that's not to say that the league is different. That's not to say that James Harden is a better player. No, people keep forgetting that Michael Jordan was one of the best defensive players in the league at the time. Yes, he is an overall better player than James Harden, but offensively, Michael Jordan is the only person that's on James Harden's planet when it comes to scoring buckets. And beyond that, he is still a consistent threat to get anywhere from 8 to 10 assists per game. Like offensively, he's the best at what he does. He can shoot a 3-pointer from anywhere. He's really improved heavily at that. He's not Steph Curry from the 3, but there's no one better at getting to the free throw line in the whole league. His pump fake just gets people every single game. You know what's coming, but you always have to defend him when he pumps up because he does just shoot that quick, and he will shoot that quick at any moment. So you know it's coming. You have to jump in the air, and as soon as you're in the air, it's usually 3 fouls because he's usually doing that from behind the 3-point line. It's the way he does that. It's never been done like anyone else ever. He does that on another level compared to anyone else in this league right now. The things he can do offensively, shooting wise, passing wise, playmaking is just amazing. He's a consistent top 5 MVP person, and all these people that are saying that he's not in that conversation because of his defense, his offense outshines at pretty much anyone, like anything that he can do on defense. He could be the worst player defensively, but as long as he's the best player offensively, he'll still be a top 10 in this league.
yeah, I mean, it's a guy who at the shooting guard position, like we've alluded to, it's not even debate of in the NBA right now who's a better shooting guard. It's just a debate of who all time is a better shooting guard because no one in the NBA right now is doing the things he did. Not even Kobe Bryant. I mean, in reality, like I said, if we look at it, not only was James Harden that 36 point per game year seventh all time between the ABA and NBA, but he's also the only player to have two top 15 spots in a points per game facet over since the ABA and NBA merger. As well, on top of that, he's the only modern NBA player other than Michael Jordan to have 3 straight years of 30 points per game or more, I believe. So it's a guy who the things we see him do, like I said, they're just unheard of, and we knock all these other things he does, and it's almost just because he's not as good as he is in these other areas. But when I was making my notes, I laughed by the end of it because unlike some of these other positions where, let's say, even in, for example, for small forward, where LeBron is first in everything up to about steals, where he's not a bad defender, but he doesn't lead that category. James Harden literally led every single category for shooting guards last year, other than field goal percentage, which went to Devin Booker. It was first for points for James Harden, first in rebounds for James Harden, first in defensive rebounds for James Harden, first in
Of course,
assists for James Harden, first in steals for James Harden, first in blocks for James Harden, first in offensive
he,
real plus
he,
minus, first in real plus minus, first in added by two over
yeah.
anyone, the highest efficiency for
It's
shooting.
funny. He's the best in steals because he's really ballsy, but he's extra risky, which actually makes which causes points against him sometimes.
Mhm.
But he can do that because he's so good offensively. Because he knows if he steals that ball, not only is it 2 points, it's probably 3 points.
He's just thinking in a different way than most guys, and that's why we think of it differently. Where if they had a real backcourt if they had a real backcourt in Houston, again, like we said about Mitchell, he'd have that help support down low. Versus they do tend to have a smaller backcourt, sorry,
Well,
they
it
do.
might be different this year. Cousins looking solid right now. Woods looking solid. This might be all mute points. They'll probably go to a different team, where we'll see his points go down because there won't be as many opportunities. But with that being said, that damn James Harden is a really good player. He's very deserving of number one spot,
Absolutely.
and very deserving of being in the top five in the league right now.
Absolutely. We just obviously would love for him to win an NBA title. We won't say too much more so we don't have another 24-minute video like we did about LeBron James. If you haven't
Yeah,
seen
people like it when we keep it under 10. So let's cut to the chase. James Harden, you're the bomb. No, don't be as ballsy defensively. You make a couple mistakes on there, but other than that, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't take advice from me. Just keep doing what you're fucking doing.
hopefully, like we said, they could win an NBA title because it would be a huge shame if people are trying to discount a Hall of Fame credit for a guy like James Harden because he hasn't won an NBA title. Because again, we're comparing him to who? We're comparing him to Michael Jordan. Like that's a guy who we know has to be in the Hall of Fame, and it would just be
Of
a
course,
shame if he doesn't win the championship, whether it's with Houston or he does get traded. We have some
he'll never get the respect he deserves.
absolutely never exactly just because of all the drama that's ever surrounded.
Yep.
But people
And right
forget too.
now he's drama.
Exactly. People forget too. Kobe had a lot of drama as well. But with that being said, James Harden first in our list. We owe him a prize. Everyone has gotten a Canadian based. Oh, he's thinking. I don't know why he didn't expect this to come, but he's looking around.
I
I think the only appropriate thing with you having a Christmas tree in the back and us being Canadian would be something very winter based, something maybe maple flavored. I personally am thinking a box of maple cookies, like the ones with the in the maple leaf shape. Those are
oh
so I think those would be a
I
fantastic.
don't even know what they're called. I don't even know what they're called.
We call them maple leaf cookies. I feel like people would know what we mean, and I think those would be a great prize.
I Hey, there we go. You called it this time. That's a good idea. I like it.
There you go,
It's
50 Christmas cards.
for the beard.
And,
Come on down. You're pretty much a lumberjack already.
and I mean, if you look at him, that looks like a guy who would just love these maple cookies. Like he looks like he has a sweet tooth. So I'm pretty confident in this.
Let's just say he's not someone that looks like he's the most athletically gifted in the world for an NBA player. But damn, he's good at what he does.
He's that guy at the park who you see who looks like he's probably like 210 when he should be 170, but when he gets the ball in his hand and he starts
Oh,
dangling, like you should just like don't even
just
try.
stay out of his way. Just let him
Exactly.
score. It's all
Exactly.
good. Game's over.
Exactly. But that's all for tonight. We still have our point guard list to go. That's going to be a big one. We said shooting guard was deep. Point guards, they have a starting guy in every single team. That makes a huge
I
difference
know.
because they're
I
point
can't even
guard.
think of it. I'm thinking of someone like Ricky Rubio not even making the top 20, and I'm like, God, are you kidding me? But it's possible. Anyway, stay tuned, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, hit us up. Whatever you need, we're here.
Awesome. Have a good night, guys.